There's a compound that researchers have been studying for over 25 years, one that's been shown to accelerate healing in tendons, muscles, and especially the gut lining, and yet most doctors have never even heard of it. The ones who have, they won't write you a prescription for it. Why? Because it exists in a strange grey zone of medicine. It's not approved, it's not patented in the traditional sense, and there's no pharmaceutical giant pushing it across doctors' desks. So today, we're pulling back the curtain on BPC-157, the so-called body protection compound, and we're looking at what the actual science says about its effects on gut health. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand more about this peptide than 99% of people ever will. Let's start with what BPC-157 actually is, because the name itself tells you a lot. BPC stands for Body Protection Compound, and the 157 refers to its specific sequence of 15 amino acids. Here's the fascinating part. This peptide was originally isolated from a protective protein found in human gastric juice. Think about that for a second. Your stomach is one of the harshest environments in your entire body. It's churning out hydrochloric acid strong enough to dissolve metal, and yet the lining stays intact day after day. Researchers wanted to understand what was protecting that tissue, and in studying gastric juice, they identified a larger protein that contained this protective sequence. BPC-157 is a synthesized fragment derived from that discovery. Now, because it originates from the gut, it makes intuitive sense that much of the early and most compelling research has focused on gastrointestinal healing. In animal studies, BPC-157 has demonstrated remarkable stability. Unlike many peptides that get destroyed almost instantly by stomach acid, BPC-157 appears to remain stable in gastric juice, which is part of what makes it so intriguing to researchers studying oral and digestive applications. That stability is rare, and it's one of the reasons this particular peptide has captured so much attention in the research community. So what does the actual evidence show? Let's get into the gut healing research, because this is where BPC-157 has its deepest roots. The bulk of what we know comes from animal models, primarily rodent studies, and it's important to be upfront about that from the start. In these studies, researchers have induced various forms of gastrointestinal damage and then observed how BPC-157 affects recovery. The results have been consistent enough to generate serious scientific interest. In models of stomach ulcers, BPC-157 has been shown to accelerate the healing of the ulcerated tissue. In models of inflammatory bowel conditions, similar to what we'd compare to ulcerative colitis or Crohn's in humans, researchers observed reduced inflammation and improved tissue integrity. One of the most discussed areas involves something called leaky gut or intestinal permeability. The lining of your intestines is supposed to act as a selective barrier, letting nutrients through while keeping harmful substances out. When that barrier breaks down, you get a cascade of inflammation and immune activation. Animal research suggests BPC-157 may help restore the integrity of these tight junctions, essentially helping seal up that barrier. There's also research looking at its protective effects against damage caused by non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, the everyday painkillers that are notorious for tearing up the stomach lining over time. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting from a mechanistic standpoint. Researchers believe BPC-157 works in part by promoting angiogenesis, which is the formation of new blood vessels. When tissue is damaged, it needs blood flow to heal. More blood vessels means more oxygen, more nutrients, and faster repair. BPC-157 appears to upregulate something called the VEGF pathway, vascular endothelial growth factor, which is a key driver of new blood vessel growth. It also seems to interact with nitric oxide systems and various growth factors that govern tissue repair. So it's not just masking symptoms. The proposed mechanisms point toward genuine structural healing at the cellular level, at least in these animal models. There's even research suggesting BPC-157 influences the gut-brain axis. Some studies have explored its effects on the connection between digestive health and neurological function, including interactions with serotonin and dopamine systems. Given that a huge portion of your body's serotonin is actually produced in the gut, this connection isn't as far-fetched as it might sound, though it's still very early science. Now let's talk about the big question, The elephant in the room. Why won't doctors prescribe it? This is where the science meets the messy reality of medicine and regulation. The first and most important reason is that BPC-157 has not been approved by the FDA for human use. It has never gone through the large-scale, controlled human clinical trials that are required to bring a drug to market. Almost everything we've discussed today comes from animal research and from anecdotal reports. That's a critical distinction. Promising rodent data does not automatically translate to proven human benefit. Many compounds that look spectacular in mice fail to deliver in human trials. So, from a strictly evidence-based standpoint, a physician simply doesn't have the regulatory approval or the robust human data to justify writing a prescription. The second reason is economic, and it's honestly a bit cynical. Bringing a drug through full clinical trials costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Companies undertake that expense because they expect to recoup it through patent-protected sales. BPC-157, as a peptide sequence derived from a naturally occurring protein, presents complicated patent challenges. Without strong patent protection, there's little financial incentive for a pharmaceutical company to fund those enormous trials. No trials means no approval, and no approval means no prescriptions. The compound essentially falls through the cracks of a system that's driven by profit incentives as much as by science. The third factor is the regulatory crackdown that has intensified in recent years. BPC-157 has primarily existed in the research, chemical, and compounding pharmacy space. It was available through certain compounding pharmacies for a time, but regulatory bodies have moved to restrict that availability, citing the lack of safety data and approval. So even practitioners who were open to it have found their access shrinking. This is exactly why you see it labeled and sold strictly for research purposes, not for human consumption. That label isn't just a formality. It reflects the genuine legal and scientific status of this compound. And I want to be crystal clear here, because this channel is about education, not prescription. We are not telling you to seek this out or use it. The human safety profile is simply not established through the rigorous trials we'd want to see. While the animal data shows a surprisingly low toxicity profile, absence of evidence of harm is not the same as evidence of safety. Long-term effects in humans remain genuinely unknown. Anyone considering anything in this space needs to understand they'd essentially be operating as their own experiment outside the bounds of established medicine, and that carries real